For the first session today, we have Mr. Anshu Prakash with us. He, as you all know, was the former Secretary of Telecom Industry and really speaking the person behind the reforms that we have seen in the last year. Welcome, Mr. Prakash. Thank you for giving time for the Telecom Leadership Forum.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Thank you very much. But I must at the outset say that it's kind of you and generous of you to say, as the person behind Telecom Reforms, DOT is a team. So it's a teamwork, and all of us did it together. And of course, the political leadership also has a great role in it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a good point to start our conversation. The first sort of political reforms, which really, the serious political reforms that happened were almost about 20 years back, when we moved away from, let's say, a regime which was license-based to a revenue-sharing-based regime. But then after that, somewhere the government sort of started looking at this entire industry as the golden goose, the cash cow, and therefore, the subsequent auctions that happened of the spectrum and so on, and that resulted into the industry becoming very, very financially weak. And the reforms addressed that. And so therefore, my first question to you would be that what really was the philosophy behind taking up these reforms? What were the challenges, and therefore what was the philosophy?
The philosophy behind the telecom reforms, which we witnessed in the year 2021, sometime in September, essentially was making things simple, promoting ease of doing business, addressing certain legacy issues, ensuring that industry has sufficient liquidity, and to promote investment and foreign direct investment in the industry with the overall objective to equip telecom to deal with the challenges of the coming decades. Because as you are well aware, this is one sector which is seeing rapid technology changes. And for all new initiatives, we do require a very robust, state-of-the-art telecom infrastructure. So reforms were in keeping with the requirement of the times. And the time was ripe. The political leadership was keen, willing. Bureaucracy was also ready to go. And we saw the reforms.
But why last year? The industry has been going through a very, very tough and very torrid time for the last decade, more than a decade, I would say. So why was it that the reforms happened last year? Was it the political new thinking? Was it the bureaucracy? I mean, as you said, it was a team. But, it would be great for you to share what really went about creating these reforms last year.
See, I think the reform process going on, it is not as if the reforms had stopped. So many initiatives have been taken since 2014, for example, from spectrum sharing to easing of licensing conditions. Many things have happened. Even if you look at the last 2 years, for example, we did major reforms for the other service providers. The concept of work from anywhere, this got introduced during COVID times. Yeah. And even before that, I recall end 2019, the calendar year, we gave financial relief to the industry because for the mobile operators, liquidity had become an issue and we gave a moratorium. So the reform process was going on, it was gradual. But what distinguishes the current reform from the previous efforts which have been happening is the scale and the depth of the reform process. Because in the current reform package, we have addressed the issue of structural reforms. We have addressed the issue of, actually I should not say we, because I am no longer in the government. What I should say, the government has. The government has addressed the issue of structural reforms, financial reforms, and for ease of doing business. In fact, when a presentation was made to the Prime Minister, he was so keen. He said, "Aap kariye, reforms laiye. We want to make things simple." So the general atmosphere, the environment was of enthusiasm. And another issue which I think we must keep in mind, AGR, the adjusted gross revenue, had become the elephant in the room.
Absolutely.
And this issue had been going on from 2002-3 onwards, going up and down, traversing various courts, TD-SAT, Supreme Court, back to TD-SAT, back to Supreme Court. Finally, the AGR issue went behind us. There was a final judgment, and the government knew exactly where we stand. The industry knew where they stood. So AGR was a closed chapter. And any issues which would emanate from the adjusted gross revenue definition, which is the very edifice on which the revenue is calculated, was decided. So now was the time when we could think for the future without any complications of getting involved in court cases. And here was the time for future. It was decided, let's rationalize definition of AGR and take away non-telecom revenue from telecom revenue.
But it would still require, very strong political thinking behind the entire thing to go ahead and do it, because governments don't want to be seen as doing favors to the industry. So was that not something on the table?
Political will is sine qua non for any reform process. It has to be. What we have done is not really favoring any particular industry or one group. No. This is a general reform. Right. Because if you look at the demand of the entire telecom industry, it has been to rationalize the definition of adjusted gross revenue. TRAI way back, many years ago, has already given a recommendation. And what the government has now done is to adopt and accept that definition, which could not be accepted earlier because of the ongoing litigation. Right. So the litigation ended. It took a little time for turbulence to settle. And then we have the reform in AGR. So that was one part. Then FDI, foreign direct investment, now 100% is available on the automatic route. Right. Now this is a big jump. Yeah. Because 49% to 100%. And this should encourage foreign players to invest in the growing telecom sector in India, and it's one of the fastest growing sectors. If you look at the telecom sector globally, India's growth is remarkable.
Absolutely.
Perhaps China and India are the only two countries which are growing that fast. Because for other parts of the globe, there's an issue of demand in terms of population. It is the issue of penetration which is already there. But the base which is available in India is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Yeah. And along with the structural reforms of AGR, of FDI, then on the issue of spectrum.
Yeah, so just before the spectrum, one part of the reform was also taking equity into multinational. I think this was probably the first time that kind of a thing happened. And perhaps would be great to have your views on that, Mr. Prakash.
The equity part, I think what you are referring to is the moratorium and the interest being converted into equity. Is that what you are referring to?
The Vodafone.
Okay, that I put in the bucket of the financial reforms. But be that as it may, that is one part of infusing liquidity. And this offer was for all. It was not only for Vodafone. Okay. Airtel could also opt for it. Mm-hmm. In fact, Airtel, I believe, has opted for the moratorium, and they have perhaps not opted for the equity part. Right. Whereas I understand the Vodafone has also opted for interest being converted into equity. I mean, I can be corrected because the options came after I had left demitted the office. So I will not do the latest position on that, but that is what my understanding is as per the newspaper reports. Now, I think this was a bold decision, there's no doubt about that. But let's look at it from a larger perspective. Government had extensive consultations with the industry and with the banking sector. Look at the exposure of the banks for funding acquisition of spectrum, and after all, it's all public money. So if any company falls, what happens to that public money?
Right.
It goes. Yeah. So what the government decided was to have a criteria where we allow sufficient time for any one of the players to pay not only for the AGR dues, but also for the spectrum auction dues, which are, and they're huge amounts, and give a 4-year period. We protect the net present value. So, your persons who are viewers or who are participating in this seminar session know very well what a net present value is. So 100 rupee today at a 10% discount value after 1 year is equal to 110 rupees. So 110 rupees tomorrow is equal to 100 rupees today if the discount factor is 10%. So we have the discount factor for the spectrum dues as also for the AGR dues. And using that, the various companies will be charged interest. It is not that we are saying you pay us 100 rupees, pay us in 4 installments or pay us after 4 years. No, pay us with interest. And then the government considered that in case the interest component became so intractable, then let's convert it into equity. And for government, it may not be a non-profitable proposition. Because if there is a company whose equity today is trading at 6 rupees and the conversion takes place at 10 rupees, and in the process, during the process, the equity values become 15, so government will actually be a net gainer. So it appears to me that this reform was a win-win situation for everybody. And then we have to look at the consumer interest. We have to ensure that there is sufficient competition in the sector.
Absolutely.
So nobody wants monopoly.
Yeah. And even duopoly, so that is why you need...
Yeah, it's an oligopolistic sector, but there should be sufficient number of players, and we would like even BSNL to come up with indigenous technology to do better, so that there is robust competition in the sector.
Absolutely. So now let me come to the spectrum issue that you referred to earlier. Now 5G implementation is there. So, what is the, first of all, the reforms that were done in spectrum, perhaps, a short view on that, and then what do you see as the future, the next paradigm as far as spectrum is concerned?
See, for spectrum, what has been followed since 2012 is that spectrum is auctioned for 20-year period. And it's kind of a lock-in. Once you buy a spectrum for 20-year period, whether you like it or not, you have to have it for 20-year period. You can't surrender it in between. You're stuck with it. So one major reform was that instead of 20 years, the spectrum will be auctioned for 30 years. Now this longer time frame gives more certainty to any potential bidder to know, yes, I have this band for 30 years. And it's a fairly long time. Investment plans can be made, capex can happen. And even the investors who are investing in these companies will be happy with this certainty. At the same time, because we did not want and did not think appropriate that the potential bidder gets stuck for 30 years, the government decided that after 10 years, they could surrender the spectrum, provided they give 1 year prior notice. Because spectrum is also a resource which must be used efficiently. It's a scarce resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can't use it, then I should use it. If I can't use it, then somebody else should use it. And whoever will buy it again will buy it in auction. So government will also get revenue in the process. Now, when the spectrum is auctioned, there is a certain upfront payment. Normally, 50% of the payment, depending on the band, is taken upfront. It can also be a little less. 33% also it can be like that. And then there is a moratorium of 2 years. And thereafter, annual payments start. Now, this is to be considered by TRAI. What will be the upfront payment? What will be the moratorium period? And then how the annual installments have to be given. But 10 years is a sufficient time for a serious player, because that much money this player will block or commit. And we don't see in a mature kind of a telecom sector with serious players any problem coming on this count. Another reform, which I think is a bold reform, is that every annual spectrum payment, which was the next annual spectrum payment, was to be secured by a bank guarantee.
Right.
Now, government has decided that the auctions which take place, this requirement has been done away with it. So for future auctions, bank guarantee will not be required. The fourth, spectrum usage charge, that will be done away, that has been done away with for future auctions. Because the thinking was that the telecom company not only pays the bid amount, but then also pays the SUC.
Yeah, that was a
Now,
double kind of a...
The SUC will get loaded into the bid. If there is no SUC, the bid should be slightly higher.
Yeah.
And government should also get more money upfront. So I think these are major spectrum reforms which have happened. And if we juxtapose them with the amount of spectrum which will now be available for 5G, because last 1 year, government has taken a lot of initiative in earmarking spectrum for 5G.
Right.
Because as per the National Frequency Allocation Plan, spectrum is used by different end users. The military will use some, civil aviation will use some, INB ministry will use some, telecom will use some spectrum. So now for 5G, where we require spectrum both for capacity and for coverage, we have enough spectrum available in the sub-gigahertz bands, less than 1000 megahertz band, for coverage purpose. And in the mid-band, which is the most valuable band, and normally for a lay person, that is the 5G band, because that is what everybody talks about. There, earlier we had from 3.3 to 3.6 gigahertz. This has been now increased to 3.67 gigahertz.
Right.
So 3.3 to 6.7 gigahertz is a fairly big chunk, which will be available for all telcos, all telecom players in the... Government has done its bit and has made sufficient spectrum available. And this is compatible with what is being done internationally, globally.
Right.
So now the ball is in the court of the industry. Now they must ensure that in the auctions, which will happen sooner or later, I believe the TRI recommendations are due sometime end of this month. And then the auctions can take place. The auctioneer is already selected as for the past auction. And the term was for 2-3 years. So there will be no time spent on getting a fresh company to auction.
Right.
And software, etc., I'm sure is being developed in parallel. So that auction can take place fast. And sometime in this financial year, year 22-23, I sincerely hope we have the rollout of 5G. It may not be pan-India, because that may not be economical immediately.
Right.
And 5G requires so much infrastructure, not just spectrum, which I would talk with you a little later if we will have time. But for 5G, the right of way, the fiberization of towers, the number of towers and using the street furniture itself to have towers for telecommunications will be critical because the cell size is very small.
Absolutely. You need very large numbers.
So the numbers will be very, very large.
Yeah.
And then 5G is not just enhanced mobile broadband. I mean, you and I won't even notice if our download speed becomes a little more. 4G also gives us quite a good speed. But so many uses for the industry are there.
Absolutely.
And in machine-to-machine communications are there. The density of connections, the connectivity becomes so high. I think that is where the real benefit of 5G will come.
So I'm glad that you feel that there will be adequate spectrum which will be available. But the latest controversy which is there is to do with the satellite communication and whether we will be bypassing the telcos in the entire process. I know you are not in a policy making situation today, and therefore would love to have your views on this entire issue.
Mr. Gupta, it's very exciting that satellite broadband of India mein is coming in such a big way and big players are interested. But we must keep it in mind that satellite based broadband will never really be a competition for the GSM based networks which are already there. Satellite based broadband is likely to be very expensive. And it's going to be focused in areas which are very, very expensive to reach by the normal cellular towers. Now, what should be the spectrum band? And there's some debate on how it should be given. I think it will not be appropriate for me to comment because TRAI is in the advanced stages of considering all these issues and the recommendations are expected by end of this month. So I hope you will appreciate that I will not like to really reveal my mind on what my views are on this particular issue. However, the fact that India, because of its vast expanse, it's a huge country, and we have island territories, we have deserts, where sometimes taking fiber would be difficult, or even having telecom towers will be difficult. So, satellite-based broadband services is an exciting opportunity, and I am very happy that India is going towards it.
That there are players coming.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
it will be a small percentage
Absolutely.
of the entire thing. One more big thing that happened last year was to do with the entire new semiconductor policy. And I know that the semiconductor policy goes beyond telecom, it also goes into electronics and that entire area. But looking at the future, what do you think is going to be the transformational impact of this new semiconductor policy?
Phenomenal. See, one area where India is behind and we are lacking is that we do not have the entire value chain manufacturing in India. Telecom equipment manufacturing is required, but such equipment also requires chips, semiconductors, and along the entire value chain. And surprisingly, Indians everywhere in the world are the ones who are involved in doing this, but they're doing it for others. So I think it is high time that we start this manufacturing, we cover the entire value chain from the first initial product to the final product to the consumer in India itself. And the incentives which are now being given by the government and the new policy which has come, it's of METI, it is not of DOT. I think it's very far-reaching in its impact, and I'm really happy that we are doing this. And it is not that over time our capacities will increase. It will take time. But still we have to start someday, sometime. So it's very vital. And even if you look at the mobile phones, for example, now India is exporting so many mobile phones.
Yeah. So, on mobile phones, I'm glad that you bring this subject up. There was a time when we were manufacturing in India, and then we went through almost a decade of disinvestment. And it was in your time period that once again mobile manufacturing started growing in India. Uh, but what do you see, in terms of the future? Because I think there is an issue of value add.
Mobile manufacturing increased during my time is a coincidence. It happened during that time. But see, we have now a number of Indian companies making mobile phones and they're making good phones. But the value addition in India is very less. We need to encourage these mobile companies to add value in India. That means the entire chain of what goes into the mobile should get manufactured in India. I think this is also one of the production linked incentive schemes which is happening, and this is a step very much in the right direction, and here the results will be much faster. And we should also encourage, which we are encouraging, the foreign companies to manufacture in India.
Right.
Manufacturing in India does not only mean manufacturing by companies owned by Indians.
Yeah.
Foreign companies should use India as their site, preferred site, to do manufacturing from here, create employment here, value addition should be here. And we would like patents should be in India, with India,
Right.
or Indians. So this is a step in the right direction.
So, therefore, looking at the future, once you talk about the entire ecosystem, starting from the chip and, manufacturing and so on, do you see India emerging as what's the next step of Atmanirbhar Bharat? Do you see India emerging as a place where, which will become a global manufacturing hub?
I think this is what will happen. Because if you look at the investments which are taking place now, the rate of growth which is happening in India, India as an investment destination is becoming increasingly popular. In fact, if you look at telecom, the investments which have happened in the years 2002 to 14 and 2014 to 2021, there's a huge difference. You'll be surprised. In the time period 2014 to 21, there have been massive investments. And with the new policy now of the government of production linked incentive schemes, FDI being permitted 100%, and focus on semiconductor chip manufacturing in India, value addition in India, I think India is bound and destined to become a major global player in telecom. And it's a big market, and it's a growing market. And currently what we have is a minuscule amount of global market share. So we have to grow. The base is so small for India that there is no way but to go up and to do better. We are bound to do it.
But somewhere 5G, we missed the entire bus of the standards and so on, because India could have very well, being such a huge market for mobility, could very well be setting up these standards. But do you see that happening with the future technologies, with 6G and so on?
Standards, setting up standards and testing capacities.
Right.
These are major challenges. And I am glad you have flagged this issue. We have a society, TSDSI, which is making standards for equipment in India. And we also have in the Department of Telecom our own organization, which is making these standards, and finally it approves those standards. And testing capacities we have set up in Bangalore, but we need to magnify, increase them substantially. We have not missed the 5G bus. I think one of the fallout of COVID was that for 5G technology, this 2-year period was kind of a moratorium period. America, Europe, everywhere, the nations were struggling with COVID, and India did very well. We did a good job. So our rollout has, I don't think it's been delayed. If you look at globally, yes, some countries may have more 5G rollout, but that is more in EMBB, Enhanced Mobile Broadband. If we actually are able to roll out 5G in major cities by mid-August 2022, I think we are fine. And the BSNL, MTNL indigenous technology for 4G, which is being promoted by government, and I believe it's now nearly final. With that rollout, because 4G transits to 5G, it is just software changes. And there are also Indian players who are now making 5G technology.
Right.
So I think we are very much in the race. Huge investments are required. CapEx are huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that we will have to keep in mind, and government policy would certainly need to be supportive to that extent. And we are taking steps in the right direction. For example, even for spectrum pricing, the thinking now is it should be affordable.
Right.
And it is not that spectrum is to be used only to maximize government revenue. We have to see the attendant benefits of spectrum for the entire industry. And when the industry grows, how much employment grows, how much the GST revenue accrues to the government, etc. So it is a larger picture which we must keep in mind, and I have no doubt that the government has a larger picture in its mind. I have no doubt in my mind on that.
So my last question to you, indeed the picture today looks very, very rosy. What do you think would be A, the social impact of this, and B, what are going to be the challenges that we will face in this journey going ahead that we should be addressing as an ecosystem?
No, this is a very tricky question because it pervades in areas which are not really telecom. It's a very, very large canvas you're asking me to now traverse, which is not a problem. I will do it. See, globally, addiction to mobile phones or mobile phones becoming, or digital technology, why mobile phones, digital technology becoming a more and more integral part of our life in everything which we do, has great benefits, but also has grave challenges. There's no doubt about that. Social media has become so powerful, and there are issues which are related to regulation of social media. There are also issues of mobile addiction. There are cases that if we take away a mobile phone from somebody, that person has withdrawal symptoms. So there are addictions which are happening.
Absolutely.
So I think a healthy society, a balanced society, would certainly keep in mind all the aspects, the negative and positives, and then take a balanced view on how we have to proceed. Clearly, advancing in digital technology, going for 5G, 6G, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
We have to do it because the entire industry 4.0 and whatever happens after that, it's based on these new technologies. So if India has to progress, India has to have any meaning in a global canvas, we have to have these technologies, which we are having. We're working towards it.
Yeah.
Now, anything which is new, which is good, can have negative fallout? Yes. But then we should be prepared for it. And we should take steps in time so that those negative fallouts are eliminated and balanced. So we must work towards it. And our standards for safety of equipment, our standards for EMF, electromagnetic frequency radiation, have to be as per the global norms, WHO norms, so that we do not have negative impacts of technology on any of us. Nobody would want that. But I think government is acutely aware of this, and we are working on our standards for radiation are even more stringent than what is prescribed by WHO.
That's right.
So we are doing okay there.
So thank you very much for suggesting that as far as the future is concerned, technology needs to be welcomed with open arms, but with a very balanced approach. Thank you very much, Mr. Prakash.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.